And so we're going to continue as if everyone was here. So for today's workshop, today I believe is the last workshop in this workshop series. And so now we're going to be designing lessons for divine transformation. And so the previous workshop, we dealt with thematic and integrated unit and lesson planning under the Supreme Wisdom curriculum. And so with that one, we kind of did a lot of clearing of words and explaining what these things are and the reasoning why we were using those methods in educating because of the instructions that we were given by Master Prophet Muhammad, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And so for today, we're going to kind of drill down even deeper because what we went over was kind of a broad view of what we are to be doing, what they want us to do. But now we're going to get into the more into the how, and specifically in lesson planning itself. So on the agenda today, I always like to go over that. So for the first part one, we're going to kind of do a very, very brief review of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Then we're going to get into the actual designing of lesson plans and showing you really how you go about it. In the first part, we're going to deal with the basic information of lesson plan. And then for the third part, we're going to go into the core information of the lesson plan. So that's really where you're going to have the most involvement. And that's going to be the meat of your lesson and planning your lesson. And then part four, we're going to end out with the additional information that goes into lesson planning. And I believe this is going to be a very helpful workshop because, again, when we're dealing with, again, who I would assume are our audience, a lot of times in our schools, not everyone who teaches there has a professional background in education. And then sometimes those are believers at the mosque who are volunteering, and also teachers that might, not teachers, parents that might be homeschooling. And so I understand that from the outside looking in, the field of education can be very intimidating because there's a lot of this teacher talk. It has a certain jargon to it. And like again, like I said last time, is that one thing everybody knows about teaching, if they don't know anything, is that teachers have these things that they have to turn in called lesson plans, right? And but I truly believe that not only just non-educators, but even new educators might struggle when it comes to lesson planning because they never were taught like the 1, 2, 3s, ABCs of how to lesson plan. And so that's what we're going to get into today, the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s of lesson planning under the Supreme Wisdom curriculum. Right. So let's get into our review. So I always like to open up with the words from from the teachings. I don't, that's again, in this system, we do everything based off of the teaching. This is the reason why we're doing it in the first place. I'm not going to play the video like I did last time, but I just want to remind us of the words of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan at the Educational Challenge Conference. So, Meet the Educational Challenge Conference. He said, I want us to look at curriculum and forget about the school system of this world. Just act as though it doesn't exist for us. And with a creative mind, now think under the guidance of the great Mahdi and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, just think on what they taught us and now what we have, and look at what we have. And then look at what we can do if we just pulled our resources educationally and financially to do something for ourselves and our children. This is what Muhammad must do. So again, he's telling us directly, it's a must. So it really is a command. But again, how are we going to do this is by bringing a creative mind to the process. And so with a little bit of creativity and some, what we're going to share these kind of 1, 2, 3s of how to put this together. I believe that anybody can put together a lesson plan under the Supreme Wisdom Educational Center. So again, to remind us, what is a Supreme Wisdom curriculum lesson plan? And simply, a Supreme Wisdom lesson plan is a thematic integrated lesson plan that is based on the Supreme Wisdom lessons. And so for those who may not know, that's our book of lessons that are given to registered members of the Nation of Islam, written by Master Fard Muhammad. And so how would that look kind of graphically to give us an idea? We have the Supreme Wisdom lessons at the center or the base of our educational system and our curriculum. And then from that, we were able to extract these 9 schools of study, or these will be your courses. So again, there's theological studies, mathematical theology, mathematic language arts and sciences, sacred science, true and proper history, how to eat and think to live, self-improvement, nation building skills and vocations, and arts, culture, and general civilization. So again, if you notice, those names come directly from the language of the Supreme Wisdom, because again, this curriculum is based in it. And so with a little bit of creativity, how would you um, bring out and teach core subjects from the basis of the teaching, as in vice, and not flipped how sometimes we do, where we take the Supreme Wisdom in the lessons and sprinkle them on top of our 9 subjects. This is just kind of a list, an example of how you can pull out subjects based on the teachings themselves. So again, in the Supreme Wisdom curriculum, we like to start off from the lessons. And again, we were told by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad that just like the Supreme Wisdom lessons start off with the student enrollment, that's the same way we should start our education, with the student enrollment. And again, in the student enrollment, we have question and answer number 1, who is the original man? And that's kind of the theme that we chose with the last workshop to build on. And we're going to continue to build on that theme today and give some examples. So again, building out the 9 subjects using who is the original man from the Supreme Wisdom lessons in our theological studies course. We can teach on who is God, and that's the most important question one could ask. Mathematical theology, we can pull out the math of spheres, circles, and circumferences, mathematical language arts, to be verbs, and so on and so forth. Now, we also, that's kind of I guess conceptually and graphically how we can build out those courses. But then also we share with you all the actual lesson plan template that we would use to actually construct our lessons. So again, when you think of, just like when we said designing lessons, when you design anything, you always start with what? A blueprint or a plan. So that's the same way lessons go. You have a blueprint or a plan. And so now, again, in any educational system, you always have lesson plans. The lesson plans can take many forms, but lesson plans usually have some of these same components, some of the same basic components, but the little differences in the requirements of the lesson plan and the language of the lesson plan depends on the curriculum that the school is using. Okay, so we talked about how curriculum relates to lesson plans. We said that a lesson or a group of lessons is not a lesson plan. And a lot of times we confuse that with a unit plan, which is, again, when you kind of think of it conceptually, lesson plan is down here, and all the way up here is your curriculum. And so the point of the curriculum is the lessons is to move that student through and matriculate that student through in making sure that the lessons that are being taught tie back to the curriculum. And that's where the differences in the lesson plan templates and the languages and the requirements of different lesson plans that you would use, they would differ based off of aligning with different curriculum. So again, in our Supreme Wisdom curriculum, when you look at it, it might look intimidating because you're like, okay, this is a lot of things going on. It's a lot of spaces to fill, and just kind of scroll through it. This is just the first page of the lesson plan, and there's more. But if you notice, again, there's just some information like the date, theme, the grade level, duration, teacher's name. But then you get down here to, okay, the objectives. What are the objectives? What are these assessments? What are the resources and whatnot? We're going to get into how you would go about filling out this information to build your lessons. So the next page, again, this is the same lesson plan. It gets into essential questions, some more foundational skills. We'll discuss that. And so in our system, um, these foundational, we'll get to that later, but these foundational skills tie back to the standards that align with our curriculum. Okay. So now, as you can see all that our lesson plan entails, now let's get into the good part. So you say, Sister Gabrielle, this is just a long lesson plan. That's a 3-page lesson plan. So how we go about filling that out? And that leads us to the first part. So I would always suggest start off with the easy stuff. That's the stuff that's right there and you really don't have to think about. So let's look. So, what are some of the basic information, the easy information that you really don't have to think about? As you saw when we previewed the lesson plan template, they ask simple questions like, what is the date? What is the name of the teacher? What are the gender of the students? And it's just that simple. So, in order to fill that out, the date you'll be referring to is the date that the lesson will be taught. That's it. And then the name would be the name of the teacher. If I was teaching a lesson and preparing a lesson plan, I would just put my name there. And again, with the gender, this is just the demographic of the students. Now, with the demographic of the students, again, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad wanted us to teach, in the perfect situation, he wants us to teach girls and boys separately. So if you are teaching that way, sometimes you might just only have boys in the class, sometimes you might only maybe have girls in the class. But again, you still can use this template even if you have a mixed gender class. But it would just simply be writing down the demographic of the students. Very easy, right? Not too hard. So the next thing that you would have to fill out is the theme. And we talked extensively about the theme in the last workshop, but just kind of remind us what is the theme. So again, the theme is the central overarching idea or big concept that unifies a series of lessons connecting various subjects like reading, math, and science into a cohesive cross-curricular experience over days and weeks. So again, we talked about in this system, in the Supreme Wisdom education, the Supreme Wisdom curriculum, we would be teaching our lessons thematically, meaning that we will have a central theme that connects all of our different subject areas, but also within the lessons, the individual day-to-day lessons themselves, one educator might be responsible for teaching multiple subjects, okay? Or also, even if you are an educator and you're teaching a singular subject, you still should have some cross-curricular components to it. So even if, say, for instance, you are teaching mathematics, you still should include other subjects from the 9 schools of the Supreme Wisdom curriculum or whatever your dedicated curriculum that you're using at your school. I see my hand is raised. That's something that just happens. But again, when you're teaching thematic units, remember, units are going to take weeks to months to complete, whereas your lessons are going to be like your daily, day-to-day activities. Okay? And so remember, if you have done your planning properly, this would already be done. So that's why this is considered basic information, because at this point, if you've planned your units ahead of time, picking your theme will be simply referring to your unit plan, and it'll just tell you what theme you're on. And just like we did for the last workshop, we said that our theme was who's the original man, and so you can put that who is the original man for your theme, simply referring back to your unit plan. The duration. So filling in the duration is the duration of time a lesson plan for a lesson plan actually varies. So not every lesson has the exact amount of time. So again, what are the factors that will cause your lesson duration to vary? So that can be the length of the class itself. Say, for instance, if you have at your school set blocks of time for each class, that could be 60 minutes or 90 minutes, however your school chooses to do it. Then also the age of the students could determine how long your lesson would last. So with older students, you might be able to have shorter lessons because the older students can pick up things faster, whereas younger students might need longer lessons to be able to really internalize that. But then also the topic complexity. Sometimes your lesson may not be able to be finished in one class period or one day. Sometimes your lesson may take 2 to 3 days, maybe even all the way to a week. So again, all those things vary depending on those factors. But again, that's just simple information because again, if you planned ahead of time, it's just simple as writing down, okay, this lesson will take this long. And so next thing you need to fill out is the level. So again, we're working from the Supreme Wisdom curriculum. So in the Supreme Wisdom curriculum, instead of saying grade, as in first, second, third, we use the term level. So again, the level refers to the student's academic standing, indicating their stage of learning. So in the Supreme Wisdom curriculum, our students are not going to be bound to a level or a grade based on their age. If a student is accelerated in advance, they may be of a certain age category, but they may their academic functioning and achievement is on a higher level. So the students will be placed on the level based on their performance. So now let's how would that look in filling out a lesson plan template? So again, this is the basic information. This is something that you can rattle off in a minute. When you pull up your template, just go ahead and put that down. So for the date, July 4th, 1930. What is your teacher's name? Fard Muhammad. What is the theme? Again, this theme we're just pulling right off of that unit plan that we've planned across the entire educational staff. Who is the ritual man? And now the duration, again, because in your unit plans, you've already uh, designated how long it would take you or estimated how long it would take you to get to the lessons in that unit, you can just pull from that unit plan. It'll take this many minutes. And then for your level, this will be level 8 or 9. So this will correspond to kind of junior high, high school level. And then for your student demographics, you have 3 males and 4 females. Basic information, it really didn't require a lot of effort on your part as an educator. So now uh, we have some of that lesson plan already done. And you might think, okay, well, why do we waste time going over this information if it's just so basic and it's just right there? Why do we have to write that down? Again, it goes back to the function of the lesson plan itself. The lesson plan, as we learned last workshop, is like a roadmap for the teacher's activity for that day. And usually your lesson plans are done in advance of when you're actually going to teach the lesson. So you as an educator, when you're getting prepared to teach, maybe on that weekend before school starts, you're reviewing your approach for the week. You say, okay, this is how I'm going to get through the information that I'm going to teach the students this week. And I have it itemized all the way down on what day so you can know what to prepare in advance of time. And so in just knowing what day you're going to teach a lesson and what's the theme and how long is it going to take you, that's there to keep you on task. But also another point of your lesson plan is that not only the educator is going to be looking at as a roadmap, but also your administration. So with your lesson plans, usually you turn your lesson plans in every week or every 2 weeks or however, whatever schedule your school is functioning on, you would turn those in for those in administration to review. So that way they can monitor your classroom to make sure your classroom and what you're teaching is in alignment with the curriculum and the school's policy. So again, it may seem like, okay, why do I have to put this on a piece of paper? But again, it goes to multiple functions. So even something as simple as that. All right, now we're going to get to the core part of the lesson plan. I check my time. So now we're going to get to the core information of lesson plan. Now, the core information that we're about to cover is really the information that's going to make your lesson come alive. Now you're actually going to get into what are you teaching in that class on that day. Okay. But again, because we have our template that kind of guides us to the information that we need to put, and it helps us kind of plug and chug those elements, and then we can have a lesson come together. So, what is the first element? That is your subject. You need to know. So, again, with your subject, this is just a specific area of learning. So, that could be teaching math, English, or science, or whatnot. And again, these subjects are tied to the curriculum. Okay. So, again, a lesson is a day to day peek into the broader curriculum that tells you everything that the student is supposed to learn as they matriculate through your educational institution. So again, you should not be teaching subjects that are not a part of your curriculum. Something as simple as that. But also, when we're talking in terms of the Supreme Wisdom curriculum system, we are teaching integrated lessons. So not only should you say, for instance, if at your institution, you may have teachers that teach distinct subjects, when you're writing your lesson plan, not only you should include the subject that you're teaching, but then you should also include the other subjects that may come up, in a cross-curricular, you might hit on them in a cross-curricular way as you're teaching that subject. So you want to include not only the subject that you may be assigned to teach, but also how it connects to other subjects that you may not be teaching. But then again, depending on the age of the students and depending on your school setup, one teacher might actually have to teach all subjects. So you can still use it in the same way. So the next thing, very important, these are some very important elements. You want to include in your lesson plan your objectives and your assessments. So just to refresh the objectives, when you're talking about your teaching objectives, they are clear, student-focused statements. Okay. So when you're writing your objectives, they should include language of what the student should do. Okay. So there are clear student-focused statements defining what learners should know or be able to do by the end of a lesson. Okay. So again, your objectives are kind of those markers on your roadmap for instructions, your activities, and your assessments. Okay. And so when you're building out, not only you should lead up with language that says what the student should do, but how you do that is that you use a verb, an action verb. Okay. And that verb is used to measure the criteria to ensure that they guide the students' learning effectively. So what do we mean? So for example, you say, the student will, right? The student will what? What type of verb that you want to use? You want to use those verbs that come from your higher order thinking. So on the lower level, you have the students will recite, right? Then you might go up a level and you have the students will analyze. Then you go up another level, the students will synthesize. And then you go up to the highest level, the student will create. So the student will create what? That's what you would put your lesson. So say for instance, if you're teaching a nation building school, you would say for your objective, the student will design a blueprint for a Muhammad mosque. That's how you create an objective. You use student-focused language. You use an action verb that you can measure their progress, and then you say what it is that you actually want them to do. The student will design a blueprint for Muhammad Mosque. That is how you write an objective. Now, that seems very simple, but I remember when I was a student in college learning education, that was the thing that was the hardest thing for me to grasp. What is an objective, or how do you write these objectives? Because I'm like, I already have to teach this lesson. Now I have to make up all of this fancy language to really just say what I already know what I'm going to do. But how do you do it? You just take whatever you're going to do and slap on the student will and a nice higher order thinking verb in front of it. So again, the objectives, they answer what will the student learn and how will they show it? And this is to promote deeper understanding rather than vague goals like appreciate and know. So sometimes as new educators and maybe people who may not be professionally trained in education, you think that stating your objective is just simple as saying, I don't know, the student will go to the museum. Say, for instance, it's a field trip day. And you just say the student will go to the museum. Okay, that's not an objective. Why is it not an objective? It's because you're not defining any type of measurable standard of their learning. Okay, so that may be uh, a beginning of that objective, but then you may need to add on, right? So okay, a student, so for the objective for this lesson is the students will visit a museum to what to learn about, I don't know, Egyptian history to compare to modern day empires, right? But you don't just want to put vague language as in what the student is going to be doing that day. But again, the reason that you use this language of the student will measurable action verb, higher order thinking action verb, and then the activity or what you want them to do is because that language is signaling that is aligning with the curriculum. So really, your objectives for your lesson should reflect and align with the language of the standards themselves. And again, what are your standards? Your standards flow from your curriculum, and they tell you what the students will learn and on what level will they learn that. Okay. So now that we've covered objective writing, now let's get to our assessments. What are assessments? Again, assessments are systematic methods, so they could be a test, they could be a project, or it could be as simple as an observation. And that's used to gather data on students' knowledge, skills, and progress. But the thing is that why? That's another thing when it comes to designing assessments. Sometimes we might be assessing students just to give them a grade. That's not what assessments are for. Assessments are not just simply to give students something so that they can earn points on. Your assessment should always be to inform teaching and guide learning, right? So you're checking in to see if the students are mastering those objectives that you set out, okay? And they're evaluating the effectiveness of your teaching. So again, if you have an objective, is that the student will be able to compare and contrast ancient Egyptian history to modern empires. Your assessment, that's what your assessment should be doing. Your assessment should be based off of that action that you set out as an objective for that student to learn. So you can't have an assessment uh, that you're it's about comparing and contrasting to modern times, right? But then your assessment is like uh is on the capital city and the demographics, the geographic locations and stuff like that. Your assessments have to line up with your objectives to be effective. You're not just giving out opportunities to grade, but those really are opportunities to see if the students are in fact learning what you set out in advance for them to learn. Okay. Another thing. Now, this is the thing I'm pretty sure people are sure that goes into a lesson plan. Your lesson plan should include teacher action. What is teacher action? It's just as it implies. Teacher action refers to the specific things that the educators do in the class. So if you notice that the objectives are focused on who or whom, on whom. Yeah, that's a preposition. On whom. The objectives are focused on the learners. So the objectives are saying, what will the learners be able to do and know and understand by the end of the lesson? But the teacher action is more about what is the teacher actually going to be doing in the classroom to facilitate that learning? What is your part to play in the classroom? So is that standing up and teaching, maybe going to the board, showing students how to work a problem, or is that more so just handing out materials and going around and observing students? So you need to specifically say what the teacher is going to be doing in this as well. And so another thing that needs to go into your lesson plan are your key terms. So again, key terms, they may seem like, well, what's the point of including key terms in your actual lesson? And again, the reason key terms are significant because those phrases or words actually represent the main idea. So just like the idea of a key is something that you put into some type of thing that is closed off to unlock it, your key terms are the avenue that you unlock student understanding because the key terms are how the students enter into the mentality and thinking that's required of that subject. Every aspect of life has its own language, right? There's a way you talk in the streets, right? There's a way that you speak when you're at work. There's a way that you speak when you're around your loved ones. And so in the different things, you need to know that language because if you can't speak the people's language, what you will not be successful. So that's the same way it is with learning a subject, is that the students need to know those key terms that's going to be able to unlock the understanding of that particular topic or subject that you may be teaching on. So again, they represent the main ideas. So you don't want to, focus on every single word that may appear in something. So say, for instance, if you're teaching your students, if you're teaching going back to the student enrollment, um, yeah, that's a bad. That's a bad one because really every word in the student enrollment is important. But um, hmm, if you have a passage, you may not need to focus on every single auxiliary word like the and if, and even though those are important. But you get what I'm saying is that you want those key terms that you're using to be relevant to the main idea that you're trying to get across for whatever subject or topic that is. And again, the key concepts, the key ideas, excuse me, the key terms are specific vocabulary within a subject, right? So even though you may be teaching on who is the original man, you may not need uh, to understand the word diameter. That may not be necessarily a key term that you will use in your mathematical language arts class. But you can still be teaching on that same thing, and it becomes a key term or relevant main concept when you're teaching mathematical theology. And next thing that you need to include are your essential questions. Now, these are important because these are the things that kind of grounds the lessons. These are the questions that grounds the lessons and are leading questions that really can spark students not just learning the lesson, but even further thought. So what are essential questions? Your essential questions are number one, open-ended questions. Okay. So when you're picking your essential questions, you don't want to just be fact-based things, but you want them to be open-ended, thought-provoking questions that guide the learning. And this is a very important thing to include, especially when you're talking about teaching thematic and integrated lessons and teaching across the curriculum. Those essential questions are going to be how you tie all of those different subjects that you're teaching together, because they're all different avenues and approaches to get to what the same place. It's just like if you're trying to go to the mosque, the route that you take to the mosque is not the same route that your sister or brother might take to the mosque, because their starting location is different, in a different position and location than you are. So how to get to that central location is going to be relative to that subject. And so your essential questions are going to help kind of tie all those together and get you all to the same place. And we're going to see how that works pretty soon. So again, your essential questions are open-ended, thought-provoking questions that guide learning, focus on deep understanding rather than simple recall, prompting inquiry, discussion, and connecting to big ideas with no single right answer, like who is God? Or why did Allah make dough? When I ask you those questions, I don't know about you, but my mind goes a million different ways, depending on how I approach it, right? Is there one single answer? Do you think there's one single answer? We shall see. So again, your essential questions drive curriculum and connect to real life and encourage students to think critically. Okay. And when we think about critical thinking, those are some of those foundational skills that you want to make sure that you touch on the lesson and are present in your lesson plan. Weigh evidence and sustain their own quest of knowledge, making learning more relevant and engaging. We love that's what we want our students to be. And so the art of asking questions, and really that's what the entire Supreme Wisdom is, right? It's a book of questions. It's a book of questions, a book of open-ended questions, and that's why we can teach so many topics from the basis of the Supreme Wisdom, because they are all essential questions. The next thing that you want to include are your resources and materials. And again, one might say, okay, what's the difference between resources and materials? So, number one, your materials are the specific tangible items such as textbooks, worksheets, videos that are used within a lesson to deliver content. So, what is your materials? The materials are the things that you're actually going to use to do what you have set out. So, if your objectives are to learn a specific thing, and then you say, okay, to assess, I'm going to use a worksheet. Students will complete a worksheet or something like that. Those worksheets, uh, if you're going to provide them with pencil and paper, scratch paper, and things like that, those are your materials. What are the actual things you need to deliver the lesson? But now when you get to resources, resources is a broader term, and it encompasses all tools and aids. Okay, so you can think of it like this. Your resources are the things that you use to kind of plan your lesson, if that makes sense. Those are the things that you use to plan your lessons, and that you might uh, get your sources and references from and things like that, or ideas from. But your materials are the things that you actually use to deliver the lesson. So plan the lesson, your kind of your resources, and to deliver the lessons are your materials. Okay. So now let's look at this part. Let's look at how we fill out our core information. This is how we make the lesson come alive. And actually, this is a lesson similar that I actually taught. And so as I was putting this together, I was going a different way. I was going to do a lesson more for little children. I said, as I was filling this out, I said, wait, I can actually use the lesson that I've actually taught in real life. So, as we fill out the information, what subjects will you touch on in this lesson? So the subjects, I have it paraphrased. SS stands for Sacred Science. So if you haven't known, I am a science teacher. So Sacred Science, TS is Theological Studies, TAPH is True and Proper History, and MLA is Mathematical Language Arts. So in this lesson that I have designed, Oh, I think I know what it is. Every time I raise my hand, it must be the AI that thinks that I'm raising my hand to ask a question, which is very cool. I'm going to lower my hand. I speak with my hands a lot. Okay. So those are the subject areas that will be touched on. And then what's the objective for this lessons? The students will conduct an experiment with household substances to make water conduct electricity. Okay. And so this is the and another thing is that don't think that you have to have one objective. The reason I only put one objective here is because I couldn't fit it all on the page. So this is really like an abridged version of the lesson that I taught, but I'll explain how it all connects. So the objective is students will conduct an experience with household substances to make water conduct electricity. And so it tells you what the students will be able to do, right, by the end of the lesson, and how's that going to be measured. So the students will conduct the experiment. How's it going to be measured? They have to make the water conduct electricity. So the instruction method, the student, I mean the teacher. Oh, I was supposed to change that. That's supposed to be your teacher action. So where you see instructional method, that's supposed to be your teacher action. So what is the actual teacher action? So the teacher will lead a discussion on the law of self-creation. And so we're taught that in our lessons and in our teachings that Allah was self-created. I hate saying self-created himself, but Allah created himself out of an atom of water, right? And electricity acted on that atom of water and thus began the first cell of life. There's a lot that's in there, right? And so that will be our entry conversation as a group discussion into it. And then from there, students will conduct an experiment to make water conduct electricity. So, and then in order to assess the students' learning, how will I know that students have learned the lesson? By the end of the lesson, the students will determine the bond type of household substances based off their properties. Now, what do I mean? This is just me writing this down. Remember, the lesson that we're going through is a snapshot of that day. What will I be doing in the classroom that day? So assume that I've already covered the background information that students will need to go on over. This was actually an example of a chemistry lesson that I taught in a public school, actually. I didn't go into the self-creation of a law, but I did cover this experiment. And so what this had to do was we were dealing with bond types, i.e., ionic bonds versus covalent bonds. I know some people may be getting horror flashbacks to high school chemistry. And so the thing is, we've already covered ions extensively, and we've kind of introduced, we've gone over ionic bonding and ions, and we kind of going into covalent bonds and seeing the differences in the two. And so what we did is that we actually conducted many different tests on these household substances. So I believe what we did is that we discussed that because of the different bond types are based off of the electronegativity difference between the elements that are creating these substances, that it gives these different types of substances different properties. So ionic compounds would have, because they're based off of ions, which means they have a larger I'm getting real nerdy, but they have a larger electronegativity difference between the two elements that make up the substance. They're going to have a stronger bond. So that stronger bond is going to manifest in higher melting points. And then another thing about ionic bonds is that when they are put in water, they dissolve, they disassociate, so they break up completely. And then another thing is that when they dissolve in water, they actually allow water to conduct electricity from the free ions. And so ions are going to be charged atoms. Atoms on the periodic table are electrically neutral, but in order to make it an ion, it has to have an imbalance of protons and electrons. And so this is all the information we would have covered. We would have gone over the periodic table. We would have gone over periodic trends and all these different things. So we would have covered all that background information. And so now this is kind of, leading into our next set of lessons and our next kind of topic within that. And so now that you understand kind of what the experiment is about, so now the students will be actually in the classroom after that brief explanation, because now, right, there are some things that you have to consider. If Allah, going in our conversation about Allah's self-creation, that he created himself out of an atom of water, and electricity acted on that atom of water, one thing we know about water is what? Water is a molecule. And so by definition, it can't be, science, in this realm, a molecule can't be an atom, right? So, and then another thing about water also is that what makes water so have these properties that we love is that water is a polar covalent bond. So from ionic bonds are made from a cation or a positive um a positive ion and an anion, which is negative ion, but covalent bonds are between two cations or two negative elements. And so the thing is that in order, so it's a lot of background. I'm trying not to go too deep, but it's a lot of background that would have already been covered. So when we're asking this question, what is our central question? Who is the original man and who is God? When we're trying to break down this concept, going into our discussion, if you really are good at leading this discussion, the student is going to ask, well, teacher, if Allah was self-created out of an atom of water, how can he be created out of an atom of water if water is a molecule, right? So, and then now that leads to why you have this cross-curricular topic, because if you're trying to approach that question, who is the original man, who is God, under the sacred science in analyzing Allah's self-creation, when we go the scientific route, we kind of reach an impasse. Why? Because of that discrepancy between an atom of water, right, and the fact that water is a molecule. So now that asks the question is, so what did the most honorable Elijah Muhammad mean when he said atom? So now you might have to switch to what? Mathematic language arts, because then you have to get into the etymology of atom, right? And you have to get into when the word was originated from the Greek word atomos, right? And the Greek word atomos means undivided. So when the word was invented by the Greeks thousands of years ago, they assumed incorrectly that atoms could not be broken down even further. But we know from modern science is that what? We have subatomic particles. The main ones are what? Protons, neutrons, electrons. But even those subatomic particles can be broken up even more, which leads us to what? The supreme wisdom, right? And we're taught that Mr. Muhammad broke the atom into what? Cracked the atom into how many parts? 10 million parts. So now we've deviated from the science, right? Went to the mathematical language arts to come back to find that the most honorable Elijah Muhammad was not wrong, right? So it takes kind of that going around, starting on a theological basis, right? We analyzed it scientifically, and all of this is happening what? Before the sun was even invented. So we're talking about history, but not just history of human events, but we're talking about history of the universe itself, which wraps back around with science. So this is how you can uh, teach what ostensibly may seem like one subject, but you still hit other subjects as you're teaching it. But like I said, it just requires a little bit of creativity. And when I say a little bit, if anybody knows me, I am tragically left brain. I'm tragically left brain. So the fact that this idea was sparked in my mind is a testament, because you want to know how it sparked in my mind, just by simply feeling out the template. dropping the information, the appropriate information to the appropriate slots, it allowed me to organize my thoughts. And now as I'm literally just filling in the information, the big picture and the idea comes to mind. And that's the testament of an effective lesson planning device. And that's how you would have to teach in this system. And see, so now this is why, like I said, generally most lesson plans have kind of some of the same basic components. But again, you have to make sure, which we'll get into in the additional information, that also what you're teaching is aligned with the curriculum. That's why it's important, you know, to understand the use of the actual lesson planning template itself, because again, that's the basis of your design. That's their blueprint. So now you see kind of the overall concept of this lesson that I'm teaching. Now, if if we recall in the beginning, this was just 90 minutes on a specific day, right? But the thing is that that's just kind of taking a snapshot of what I'm going to be doing on that day specifically. But I still may extend this lesson throughout the rest of the week to really totally encompass and hit all the areas that I need to hit on Allah's self-creation. So, but that's just what I'm doing that day for 90 minutes. Okay. So now when you look at some of the key terms in order to explain this phenomenon, what are some of the key concepts? Atom, what the main idea is water, electricity, anion, cation. Oh, I'll get back to that. Anion, cation, ionic bond, covalent bond, polarity. Those are some key terms that students will need, just like when I was explaining to you what the purpose of this experiment is to assess. That's the same thing that your key terms will need. So we talked about the essential question. The essential question are open-ended. Our essential question was not what are the elements that make water. That's a direct answer. But the open-ended, that kind of gets the mind to think is what? Who is the original man? Who was God? And then this even extends further because that's just chemistry. But then when you get into biology, when you get into things like that, we know that in order to have life, you have to have what? Water. So if we're saying that Allah was a human being, and we know that human beings have a certain body composition of water, right? Approximately 75% water, then we make that comparison to the what? To the earth and its composition, which ties back into the student enrollment. So it all is tied together. So you have to get out of the mindset that you're going to be teaching these discrete topics, these discrete subjects, because everything is connected. Just like when you walk outside your door, there's that, the door is just like a mental thing that separates you from the outside, but there's no separation. It's all a continuum. And so, what are my resources? These are the things that I use to plan this lesson, right? Message to the Black man. Our Savior has arrived. Flag of Islam. The theology of time. These are my references. This is where I'm coming up with these concepts that I had to immerse myself in to get the background knowledge to be able to lead this class discussion and come up with the lesson itself. So, what are my materials? What are the things that I actually need to deliver that lesson? What are the things that I need to carry out this experiment? That will be what? LEDs, those are light emitted diodes, like little light bulbs, batteries, cups, distilled water, salt, sugar, vegetable oil, baking soda, vinegar. Now, this is another important thing. Pure water does not conduct electricity. In order for electricity to be conducted, it has to be diluted specifically with ions. So have you ever seen, like in the James Bond movies, he's out defending the world with a pistol, and he's fighting all these bad guys, and then like there's water that's on the ground because of they knocked over like a bin of water. Then she shoots down like a power line, and the power line hits the ground and electrocutes all the henchmen. The reason that they get electrocuted is maybe because they're dirty, maybe because they were sweating. And so from the salts that's in the body naturally, or salts that may have come in contact with, it dilutes the water and causes ions to disassociate into the water. And then the reason the water conducts electricity is because it's a polar covalent bond, the water molecules have a slight charge. That means one side of the water molecule is slightly negative and the other side is slightly positive, which will attract or pull apart the ions, the cations and the anions that are electrically charged. And so now you're dealing with what other concept are you dealing with? Opposites attract. Who's the founder of opposites attract? Unlike attract. See, so you're tying back into the lesson. There's so many connections, right? But this is where planning ahead of time comes, but then also what's your resources? If you're not reading those books, you won't know this. If you're not attending your classes, you won't know this. But the connections are replete. And so hopefully this was a demonstration and you can see how it is possible to teach everyday lessons rooted in the supreme wisdom that can all be connected in a theme and also be taught integratedly, cross curricular. It's not hard. Nobody's saying that, say, for instance, if you are a mathematics, language arts teacher, or an English teacher, that you have to be like on my level who has a degree in physics and mathematics to be able to break down a chemistry lesson. No, not saying that you have to be able to explain it in that level of detail. It'd be nice, but you still should mention the connection. You should show that there's a connection somehow, right? Because even though science has its technicalities, language is language. All of those key terms have a meaning that are important. Electricity has the same root word of electron, right? So when you're dealing with E, so it's so many things that you can break down when you're talking about a covalent bond. Co means together, and valent has to do with valence electrons or the outer electrons. So a covalent bond is a bond that shares the outer electrons. And so it's so many things that you can connect to. Um, so with this experiment, what you will find is that if you dissolve like salt in water, right? One thing, you're going to heat salt. You can heat salt all day, it's not going to burn. But at the same time, if you put it in water and you stir it around, the salt is going to seemingly disappear, right? But then if you stick electrical leads into it connected to some type of close a circuit with a battery and a light, you can make the light turn on by sticking it in water that has salt dissolved in it versus oil, right? What do we know about oil? Oil and water, what? Don't mix. So that lets you know that what? Oil does not disassociate in water. Another thing is that if you heat oil up, what's going to happen? It's going to start bubbling. It's going to start boiling. So it has a what? A low melting point. And then again, when you stick the leads in there, assuming you haven't contaminated anything, is not going to conduct electricity. So again, it makes you think about what had to have been present. Even if you don't know, nobody told you what was present, you can assume what had to have been present. So you had to have, and you had to have had an ion present. So and then you think about what's the next creation. The next creation, you have, well, woman. So first of all, that's another thing that comes up. If you have full-on people being created, Where were they created on? You can go on and on and on. So that gets into your earth science, that gets into your life cycle, how the animal kingdom, plants and all. It's so many things that you can teach from that if you just have a little bit of creativity in a good plan. But I'm going to move on to close this out because I believe the time, yes, time is amongst us. So the last little bit of information that you need to include in your Supreme Wisdom curriculum lesson plan is your additional information. So what are those additional informations? Your learning modalities. So if you don't know, your learning modalities are sensory pathways. So I'm pretty sure everybody has heard of this, the visual learners, the auditory learners, the kinesthetic learners, right? So these are sensory pathways people use to take in, process, and retain information. So it's how you learn, how you use your senses to learn. And some people are more dominant in others. And again, in our system, we want to be not only thematic and integrated, but also we want to be holistic as well. We want to teach the whole person. Everybody learns differently. So we want to make sure in our lessons, when we're constructing our lessons, we're giving opportunities to learn through the different modalities, at least more than one. Um, then when we're talking about foundational skills, if you remember when we reviewed the lesson plan, we had foundational skills that we also have to include. But with the foundational skills, really this is kind of like when you're filling this out, it could be like a checkpoint. Check off the things that apply. It doesn't necessarily have to go into real detail, but your foundational skills are the essential building blocks for learning, working, and life, enabling one to adapt, learn, and succeed in education, jobs, and daily activities with an emphasis on spiritual awareness, self improvement, and nation building. So, again, this additional information, why is it important? It's because these little tidbits help us align our lessons with the curriculum. Anybody can make a lesson plan. Anybody can find a lesson plan template and just fill it out. But what makes this lesson plan in the way that we teach different from any of, because our lesson plan aligns with our curriculum, and our curriculum states these values that we want to produce in student as a final valuable product. So now, what does that look like in our filling out a process? So with our learning modalities, you want to specifically detail what activities align with the learning modality. So we said in this lesson that we kind of this this what's this, a fake lesson, but this proposed lesson that we come up with, we said that the class discussion could cover our auditory learning styles, and then our lab experiment will cover our kinesthetic learning modalities. Then for our foundational skills, if we look at what we did throughout the lesson, this lesson addresses God consciousness, critical thinking skills, linking and generating knowledge, universal expression of fundamental truths. And another thing that I missed was communication skills, because in a discussion, right, in a dialogue, in a group discussion, you have to be able to give everybody a chance to speak, be able to summarize things in your head, think about questions, hold them, and be able to express them clearly and coherently to a listening audience. So there's many, many, many more things that you can think of. And remember, everything that we covered in this is just a proposed lesson. This is just me coming off my head and just filling out this information to show you that it is possible to do this if you just follow the plan. And so, with that being said, I would like to leave you all as I came before you in the greeting words of Assalamu alaikum. And thank you all for your attention and time. And if there are any questions, I will take those now. Uh, but if there are no questions, we all can dismiss for today. And thank you again for your time and attention. Okay, well, we can stop the recording because I think we got what we need for the